And joining us now here in studio, Mr. Dan Perry, International Affairs Analyst, former Europe, Middle East editor of the Associated Press. Thank you very much, Mr. Perry, for joining us. So who will have to give in order for something to happen?
Well, the whole world is on edge waiting for this incursion into Rafah, which promises to be a fight to the finish and could easily become a bloodbath with thousands of Palestinian casualties, hundreds of Israeli soldiers, and possibly the death of the hostages. That would really be a calamity, and Israel would be risking all kinds of opprobrium from the Europeans. You already hear talk of an arms embargo from the UK and from other quarters in the EU. It would be endangering its peace treaties with Egypt, Jordan, and the Gulf. It would be angering the Biden administration to the point where unilateral declaration of recognition of the Palestinian state is actually in the cards. It would be a calamitous outcome of the kind not unfamiliar from right-wing policies that are typified by hubris and tough talk, but not a lot of forethought. I think there are alternatives.
We have heard, many diplomatic threats in the past, and not just for the sake of threatening, but with many Israeli allies believing that they're doing the right thing. And yet, at the end of the day, the dog barked without actually doing something about it. We've heard similar threats or warnings in the past, and yet Israel conducted its military campaigns on the ground, and
I think a clear and present danger to the lives of the hostages would be reason enough to view this as a calamitous outcome, even if it turned out that there was no arms embargo from the UK. It's a bad situation that has to do with a fundamental strategic mistake, which is that Israel's fighting a war that it shouldn't be fighting because of one hand being tied behind its back in the form of the hostages. They cannot actually go after the Hamas leadership in the last tunnel when they're surrounded by the hostages. That is a problem that I haven't heard addressed particularly convincingly quite yet. Maybe sleeping gas or something of the sort, but it obviously is a situation that would endanger the hostages. And again, why not at least try to figure out a more creative way out?
All right, enough with the build-up. With all the respect to the Biden doctrine, the Perry doctrine.
At least one idea I can conceive of is for Israel to take at last the diplomatic initiative and actually go to the hostage talks in Cairo or anywhere else, or maybe just hold a big news conference and make an offer. And the offer might look like this: we accept the main Hamas condition. We are willing, in exchange for all the hostages, to end the war. We're not going to pull out of Gaza immediately, but we're not going to invade Rafah. So all this death and destruction is not going to happen, and the hostages are released. We're going to begin the day after reconstruction in Gaza. If it were me, I'd say we return to Palestinian Authority, new, improved, rejuvenated. When the Palestinian police is ready, we might even pull out, as Hamas asks. We will work with the Arab world to pull together a Marshall Plan for Gaza. We will maybe have the Arab world and others help police Gaza in the interim, help the Palestinians become ready. Meanwhile, Rafah can join this arrangement if Hamas surrenders. If they don't, and presumably they won't, then Rafah is not part of this arrangement, and Hamas can maybe try to spin this into some version of a victory in their several square miles in Rafah, and explain to the people that it's wonderful that all this death and destruction has happened because of October 7th, and see if they don't tear them limb from limb in this very small territory. We would be letting out people from Rafah who are unarmed and who are not Hamas suspects, and waiting to see what happens in Rafah. Meanwhile, for sure, there are those in Israel that advocate that Israel should do a hostage deal for all the hostages and full Hamas, basically, and attack them later. I'm not advocating that. What I am saying is Israel should, at that point, institute the zero-tolerance policy that, with hindsight, should have been the case probably since 2007, and say, we will start a new war upon the first rocket, the first tunnel, the first kidnapping, the first attack, whatever it is that happens. Now, I'm not in any way predicting Hamas will accept this, but I am saying that this will really change the equation in terms of the surrounding politics of it all, because Israel will, the pressure is a zero-sum game, roughly. The pressure will move from Israel, that currently has proposed nothing but a policy guaranteed to bring death and destruction, onto Hamas, because their conditions have largely been accepted. They're allowed to remain standing. We might even add to this edifice agreeing that the leadership can exile to Qatar or to Turkey, as we've discussed before. There are a lot of incentives that can be introduced into this equation to make Hamas look ridiculous for holding on to Rafah. And if they want to spin that as a victory, let them, because this is certainly a less bad option than the likely bloodbath that will happen from an incursion into Rafah right now, with international credit to this government having reached zero.
I'm listening to you, and these are all familiar components, yet rearranged or perhaps introduced anew at this point in time?
I'm saying let them keep Rafah, and that is new, essentially. And let's see if under these conditions they insist on prolonging the war.
Right.
Now, this means that Israel has not had a total success, but it has removed Hamas from Gaza City and from 80% of the Strip. It has returned hostages. It has, if this was anyone's goal, significantly punished Gaza overall for daring to be led by Hamas, and it's delivered a lesson to the region.
So Hamas sovereignty in Rafah and in all the other areas of the Gaza Strip, no offensive, yes defensive forces.
Essentially.
Yeah.
And beginning the day after, because the world is freaked out by Israel's refusal to present any kind of a horizon.
And this is somewhat striking, because it seems to be a lose-lose. On the ground, there are already some preparations for this day after. Only today, this pilot of reopening the Carney crossing in the northern part of the Strip, this communication with the local families or tribes in the northern part of the Strip to start and rule. So it is happening without being stated. It is happening.
The tribes are a non-starter. I think that reminds me of the village leagues that Israel had fantasies about in the West Bank in the 1980s, to find local leadership that is not the PLO back then. I don't think that'll work. It's going to have to be the PA, and basically for the world to support this, it has to be the PA. And this is a chance for Israel to issue certain demands of the PA that are long overdue and have a pretty good chance of being met, because the incentive on everyone's part, pretty much the entire world, but especially perhaps the region, Egypt, Jordan, and the Gulf, is such that the pressure on Mahmoud Abbas and the others would probably be irresistible. And I haven't even mentioned that in all likelihood, if the war winds down, and it happens because of a proactive Israeli policy that was intelligent, measured, and aimed at saving lives, that would probably accelerate the long-awaited normalization with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, well, remains to be seen whether Israel will get the credit for that. Meanwhile, if those decision makers are not listening to your proposal, Mr. Perry, and we are about to see yet another Paris summit, what is the dynamic to your understanding?
Well, first of all, part of the dynamic is that Ramadan is around the corner.
Right. But we said it about Christmas a few months ago.
But they're Muslims in Gaza.
Yeah, and yet the Christmas was.
Yeah, Christmas was a thing, but Ramadan is a bigger thing.
All right.
Clearly, and Ramadan risks mayhem within Israel itself and also in the West Bank, and that's the kind of contagion that everyone had feared, and so far, mercifully, has basically not occurred. But look, when I express pessimism about the prospect of a ceasefire, of a hostage deal, it's because Israel's been insisting on all the hostages because they're running out of time. And Hamas has been insisting on, in exchange for that, an end to the war, which Israel can't give except within the contours, I think, of the plan I just proposed. It can't give them the end of the war and allow them to go back to ruling Gaza, all of Gaza.
Right.
And if it's that binary, if it's all or nothing, I think we'll get nothing. The dynamic in the hostage talks could eventually lead to a partial hostage release in exchange for a temporary ceasefire.
Well, we'll see if this is enough, for both sides to save face, so to speak. This is what diplomacy is all about, right? To try to salvage
right.
people from their own,
It would be
from
something
themselves.
of a face-saving way out, but it also achieves Israel's major goals.
Before we wrap up our conversation for tonight, when it comes to Congress, to what is happening on Capitol Hill, the fact that the situation in Israel and in Ukraine is becoming, one bundle, is it good or bad for Jerusalem when it comes to aid, that is?
It complicates things, obviously, and it has already clearly created a delay, and it created the false impression that Biden doesn't want the package to pass for Israel. But I'm fairly certain that even if it is decoupled, and even if the Republicans do manage to scuttle aid to Ukraine, there will eventually be a separate bill for Israel that the Republicans would support, and Biden would be hard pressed not to support it. On the other hand, a lot depends on what happens here on the ground. If Israel doesn't listen to my plan and invades Rafah, clearly against the will of the U.S. administration.
So not listening to Dan Perry will have a ripple effect all the way
it
to
could take them one step
November,
further to conflict
Washington.
with the Biden administration in an election year.
All right.
Not too convenient.
The butterfly effect, right?
Yes.
Mr. Dan Perry, thank you very much.